Thank you to the minority leader for his questions and his kind comments. I think it's worth stepping back for a moment and realizing why we're here with this legislation to try and improve our storm response, especially the storm response of our utility companies here in Massachusetts to large-scale storms. In 2009, here in the legislature, the two bodies and the governor came together to craft the first piece of storm response legislation here in Massachusetts, largely in response to the ice storm that hit western and north central Massachusetts so incredibly hard, and the inadequate response of the utility companies that serve that area to meet their customers' needs. What came out of that was a bill that provided a three-prong approach. And before moving forward on that, I should recognize the distinguished former chairman on the House side of Telecom, Utilities, and Energy, Senator Feingold, who did such good work on that bill, along with Senator Flanagan, Senator Brewer, and so many other members of this body. But that three-pronged approach was to have, first, a year-round effort to preparing for the preventative work that needed to be done in storm response. That was done by requiring every investor-owned utility to file an emergency response plan with the Department of Public Utilities that was approved by them in coordination with municipal emergency response coordinators to try and make sure that we dealt with what seems to be the most persistent and difficult issue in storm response, which is communication among the various responsible entities and agencies that are seeking to make sure that not only the worst impacts of those storms are dealt with, but also that power is turned on as quickly as possible. We sought, the second prong of that approach was we sought to have clear lines of communication during a storm so that communities had an emergency response coordinator appointed, so that response coordinator could communicate with the utilities and with the Mass Emergency Management Administration to make sure that we knew where the trouble spots were, and so that we were not at cross purposes working to make sure that the most vulnerable populations had their power restored in the most expeditious way possible, and that we made sure that a complete restoration was done in the most efficient and effective manner possible. The third prong of that approach in the bill that is already law today was to make sure that there were significant penalties and fines in place for utility companies that did not respond in accordance with their emergency response plans and with the service quality standards that are already on the books. Those penalties and fines, as they are currently in law, can be as high as $250,000 for a single violation, and as high cumulatively for a single utility as $20 million. So that is what we put in place in 2009 in this legislature. I will say this before moving forward. Many other states are looking at the first piece of storm response legislation that we did here in Massachusetts as the model for what they need to put in place. We got the policy right, we got the process right, and we got the incentives right. But even though we are ahead of other states, better than bad is not good enough. I think the response that we have seen to the storms over the past year or so, and I think many of my colleagues will agree with me, has shown me that there is significant room for improvement. So what have we learned over the course of this year? First of all, we have had three significant storms. We had the tornado that hit western Massachusetts. We had Hurricane Irene at the end of August that affected the entire state and left over 650,000 people without power at its peak. And we had the October snowstorm that left a similar amount of people without power, that dumped anywhere from 2 feet of snow out in my district to 6, 7, 8 inches of very heavy snow, wet and heavy snow in other parts of Massachusetts, leading to significant outages as well. We have learned from just watching the response in those areas that our storm response legislation, the processes we have set in place, have worked very well for small, concentrated weather events. So the response by the utility companies and the other agencies was significantly better to the tornado or to prior storms than it was to Hurricane Irene, a large-scale regional storm, or to the snowstorm at the end of October, also a large-scale regional storm. So there are lessons that we have learned already. We know that we need to perfect our storm response policies to deal with bigger storms. There are lessons that we are learning right now as the Department of Public Utilities undergoes its public hearing and investigation process to determine if the utility companies lived up to their emergency response plans and if they lived up to their service quality standards. And there are clearly steps that we need to take and we can take even before the outcome of those investigations is known. So what are those steps? What do we need to do? First of all, it is very clear that in a year like this, where you have several significant weather events, that the Department of Public Utilities, given the many requirements that are before it, needs and requires more resources to do the thorough investigations that we are asking them to do to make sure we get the right answers and we learn the right lessons. So part of this bill is a proportionate assessment on every one of the investor-owned utilities to fund just short of $500,000 worth of staffing at the Department of Public Utilities. Another lesson that we have learned is that there is not clarity right now in where the penalties that are assessed on the utility companies will go. We say clearly in the bill that is before us that penalties assessed on utility companies will be sent back proportionately to the ratepayers, both businesses and residential consumers, in proportion with the energy that they would have used over the time that they did not have that. That is something that has been the past practice when penalties have been levied from storms, but it's something that we believe needs to be made more clearly in the law. We seek to improve and expand on the requirements to the investor-owned utilities around customer communication. So in the bill before us, we say to the investor-owned utilities, after a 24-hour damage assessment period, you will be required to provide your customers with twice daily updates about estimates for when their power will be restored. We think that is reasonable to say after 24 hours. Individuals and businesses need to be able to plan for how long they are going to be without power and how they can best work to address that. We also require that each of the investor-owned utilities have, as some already do, staff at the Mass Emergency Management Administration bunker so that we can, again, improve coordination and communication not only between the utilities and MEMA, but also among the utilities. So in the district that I represent, you have 48 communities which are evenly split among Western Mass Electric Company and National Grid. We need to make sure that the coordination among the utility companies as well is improved, and having all of them at the Mass Emergency Management Administration is crucial for doing that. We also require in this bill that every one of the utilities 24 hours prior to a significant event has a Massachusetts-based or regionally based call center so as to make sure that when one of our constituents picks up the phone, calls the utility company, they have someone on the other end of the line who knows the region they are talking about, who understands the community that they live in, and can more quickly respond to the challenges that they face. Finally, we also require to improve municipal and utility communications that in the emergency response plan, the investor-owned utilities designate clearly the emergency coordinator